another episode of In the Heyday. I am your host, Oliver Hayes, and I'm super excited to be recording this episode because I've been promising another rewatch podcast episode of the Colorado Buffaloes' recent games for quite a while now, but obviously haven't come through because we are 4 games into the season. The Buffs are 4-0, having beaten not only Montana State, who we did our one and only rewatch episode of to begin the season, but they beat Montana State, and now they've beaten Eastern Washington, Providence, and Alabama State. I gave my live reactions after all those contests live from the CU Event Center. Well, I guess not live, but, at the CU Event Center, and uploaded pretty short after I recorded those. Yeah, I've done the rewatch of all those games. I rewatched those games, after they happened the next day. I do multiple rewatches, some all the way through. Other times focusing more on defense. I did a lot more focus on the defense with these rewatches specifically in the ball screen coverage and transition defense and things like that. But either way, I've been recording the rewatch episodes because I didn't do one for Eastern Washington or Providence. So this episode will be a conglomerate episode of the past 3 games against Eastern Washington, Providence, and Alabama State. So won't be as maybe in depth as I'd like these rewatch episodes to be because I'll have so much ground to cover, and I'm already talking a lot. You guys know how long-winded I am. But yeah, to start, before I get into the rotation, the defense, and the offense, and then a little bit of UC Davis, my 3 big takeaways from rewatching these games and just mulling these games over and thinking about, just the rest of the season is the first big takeaway is I really, really, really like the team improvement. And, that's a pretty basic take, but Tad Boyle talked about all offseason, all preseason, how this team is not going to be so much better in January, February, March than it is, than what we saw, than what it was during the summer, than what it was during the preseason, and what it is, now in November and soon to be December. And so to already see an improvement, specifically on the defensive side of the ball, just 4 games into the season, and seeing improvements made on the fly, even when head coach Tad Boyle missed the practice before the Buffs took on Providence, is fantastic. To see the cohesiveness that the Buffs have displayed this early on in the season from such a young group who experienced some young issues in terms of foul trouble and defensive principles in the first 2 contests, to see them, step up, lock in on the scouting report, take more accountability and work as a team on both sides of the ball to stay undefeated has been very impressive to me, and it just makes me excited as someone who covers the team to see where the Buffaloes will be, not only, by the end of the season, but what does this team look like after Feast Week? What does this team look like by conference play? What does this team look like midway through conference play, etc.? Each game feels like there could be a new layer of the Buffs unlocked. I think the progression will obviously slow down now that the season's a little bit underway, and the Buffs maybe won't be taking on as solid a teams for the rest of non-conference out of maybe potential like Washington or Nevada or something when they're out in Palm Desert. Colorado State, they're traveling to Moby Arena, which should be a good game, but the Stanford game too. So, obviously there will be some contests not to overlook for the rest of non-conference, but, maybe there isn't as much room to grow against lesser opponents leading up to conference play. But either way, I'm excited for the improvement that will come, the improvement that we've seen. Specifically on the teamwork side of things, the Buffs were able to move the ball better, still cut down on turnovers, and play much, much better defense, ball screen-wise, transition-wise, and showed a bunch more depth. But moving forward, I think energy goes right hand in hand with it. My second takeaway is just that the energy is still there. It's just as good as advertised. And no matter what lineup is in the game, there's never a time where the Buffs feel like their offense is dragging, where it feels like there's a lull in the game. And at any given moment, this team can really pop off. And I'd say they can kind of get hot, but at any moment there could be a play that could be on SportsCenter top 10. There's a number of individuals who can do exciting things with the basketball. I think Bangat Dak probably has the highest potential to do so, but there are some guys who can score the ball, which feeds more into the depth and feeds into my third takeaway, which is the front court. The Buffs are way more versatile across the board. I will talk a lot about the backcourt and Barrington Hargress and Isaiah Johnson at the point guard positions, the wings of Felix Casares, Josiah Sanders, Jalen Holland, all those guys. But the front court specifically, after watching the last 3 years and covering my first 3 years of collegiate basketball with Lawson Levering and Eddie Lampkin and Elijah Malone as the main centers, and only having a Bangat Dak or a small ball forward, a non-true 5, to be the backup center, to see what this front court has in the post, on defense, on the glass, to have multiple players who can play on the block, even though Alone McKaylee is smaller, he adds just so much more versatility. And while Bangladesh and Sebastian Rancic maybe haven't, come along and shown as much of a flat. I mean, Sebastian Rancic is more of a wing player, so that's not as worrisome. But while Bangladesh has kind of taken a second, coming back from his injury, as Tad Boyle said, from Alabama State, and that needs to be taken into account. To see a little bit more of a post presence come off the bench and Alone McKaylee to help aid Elijah Malone, who's taken a step in his 6th year of collegiate basketball, is really a breath of fresh air, along with the improvements made as far as turnovers, sharing the ball, defense, etc., etc. But I've been talking for a few minutes now. I want to get into the rotation a little bit. I'm not sure exactly how I'll splice this up, because I have points to make kind of across all games. But looking specifically at the Eastern Washington game, I guess I'll talk about this in terms of foul trouble. In the Eastern Washington game, the Buffs the main person who dealt with foul trouble with Felix Caceres. He got 2 quick fouls, and he was the main guy who was guarding Isaiah Moses, who went for 30 points against Colorado. And, Felix Caceres got 2 quick fouls early, had to switch off him, and go, switch off everybody and go to the bench. And so the Buffs had to, rely on Josiah Sanders, Jalen Holland, some younger guys to try and take on Moses and the hot shooting Eagles with Caceres on the bench. But not only that, Elijah Malone got some first half fouls. Alone McKaylee had 4 fouls throughout the course of the contest, so he wasn't always available, at least down the stretch of the first half, if I remember correctly from my rewatches. And so to see the depth still of this team, as the Buffs are playing 9 guys, but 10 sometimes, as Ian Edmond is coming in, specifically in this game. He scored 8 points in under 4 minutes as he had 2 threes and a layup, a floater before a half. But to see the depth defensively, when Felix Caceres wasn't able to stay on the court due to the whistle, whether you agree with the fouls or not. Personally, I didn't, but it's just the way the game is called sometimes. To see the depth there was impressive, and then to see in the next game where Sebastian Rancic deals with foul trouble, a guy who's the Buffs' top option, a guy who had 24 points and helped the Buffs win against Eastern Washington. He gets 2 quick fouls, or 2 early fouls, midway through the first half in the Providence game, and he can't play in the front court. And that's where the front court depth that I talked about with Alone McKaylee, who then has, I think he had 20 points. 20 points in the Providence game. Alone McKaylee is able to come off the bench, and he's still dealt with foul trouble. He was a guy who was still able to produce and provide that front court versatility and depth that the Buffs didn't have in past years, and once again showed not only that the Buffs can be deep in the backcourt, but can be deep in the front court as well. And not only in this Providence game, to prove that point with the front court depth, but there was a moment where Barrington Hargress, he had a double-double. He played fantastic. Isaiah Johnson, he had another 15 points. He came alive down the stretch and helped close this game out. There was a moment in that second half where Isaiah Johnson got his 3rd foul and dealt with some foul trouble. Barrington Hargress is dealing with cramps. And Josiah Sanders and Felix Caceres and Jalen Holland were the guys who were having to weather the storm for a few minutes and take on the ball handling duties, facilitating the offense. And it wasn't the prettiest thing in the world, I'll say that. I think there were a few more turnovers than when Hargress and Johnson have the ball. But the defense was up, the energy was up, the Buffs still were able to turn over the Friars. And so you were able to see a full display in back-to-back games of how the Buffs can maneuver foul trouble in not just one individual or one area of the court, but all facets, whether it's the front court, the back court, a wing, a guard, center, big man, whatever it is. The Buffs seem to have options to play guys even if 2-3 guys are in foul trouble. And then against Alabama State, the Buffs, we are able to see the guys who are going to potentially fill that 10th man role, as the Buffs have kind of figured out a solid 9 guys, but the Buffs they've played Ian Inman a little bit so far. He's been the guy who they've gone to more as the 10th man, but we've seen Fawaz Tagovailoa play a little bit. And we've seen, I don't think we haven't really seen Andrew Crawford, but all 3 of those guys got time against Alabama State as the Buffs went on to a huge win, almost by 30 points. I don't really have too much to take away from those minutes, but again, you got to see, what the Buffs can possibly have off the bench. there is a little bit more of an emergency situation, and maybe what this team will display down the line if Ian Inman can he's a great shooter. That's what he brings to the floor. The Buffs are trying to get him better on the defensive end and more versatile as an offensive player. If he can develop and be somewhat of a defensive player down the stretch of the year, I could see him getting decent minutes, especially with how well he can shoot the ball. He was able to show it against Alabama State, missing all 4 of his field goals, but, obviously scoring 8 points in less than 4 minutes against Eastern Washington. That was huge. Fawaz Takaoafaola, he's trying to get along, just still learning the game, learning the system, learning the plays. Those are big things he's been talking about. There's been a lot of talk about not getting out of fouls, getting out of foul trouble, not getting silly fouls. But he brings energy. He has rebounded the ball pretty solidly so far. Grabbed rebounds in his few minutes. And while Andrew Crawford is still, of those 3, Tad Boyle, he's the only one who Tad Boyle hasn't mentioned as a potential of the 10th man. But even still, he's going through probably the biggest learning curve. Moving from a 1-2 in high school to a 3-4 in college. But you can see, his guard instincts as he's a solid cutter and can shoot the ball decently. And, it's still coming along. He only went 1 of 4 in 7 minutes from the field against Alabama State. But he hit a 3 and made some good cuts, in my opinion. So, basically, my point is, across these 3 games, that the Buffs have a bunch of depth. And with the improvement that I noted earlier, it could be even deeper by the time the Buffs get to conference play or by the time playoffs will roll around in terms of the conference tournament and March Madness. But looking more at the defense, which is the big thing that I've just wanted to talk about. It's what I've asked all my questions about. It's what I've been watching the games for. It's what we've all been kind of focused on because there's been nothing wrong with the offense. But through the first 2 games against the Big Skies, tough talent of Montana State and Eastern Washington, the Buffs had allowed over 50% shooting from the field against both those teams, allowed solid 3-point shooting from both of those teams, and, barely eked out wins in both those games. And so everyone was wondering how were the Buffs going to improve their defense going forward against a Big East team in Providence, and, generally just the rest of the season. And against Providence, who the Buffs, are pretty familiar with, of course, with Nate Tomlinson coming over from that coaching staff, Cam English being a former CU assistant. He runs, he has Colorado principles, Tad Boyle principles, I say that. They knew that, Colorado knew that Providence was going to play fast, that they were going to push the pace, that they were going to try and get their guards going as their interior wasn't as dominant as Montana State and Eastern Washington. And the Buffs knew that. And so, while the Buffs knew the scouting report against Montana State and Eastern Washington as far as the players that were going to hurt them and things like that, obviously there's less to know about Montana State and Eastern Washington. They're going to know more about Providence. So I think that played in a little bit of a factor. But as Josiah Sanders said when I asked him about it yesterday, for him, at least, it was his first time seeing a huge, long scouting report. And so against Providence and Alabama State, for him and the rest of the young guys, now they know what that looks like, how to follow and study a scouting report that accounts for, a whole roster and has so many nuanced details along with whatever film they've watched. So I think, that was definitely an aspect, but there's, the more to know about Providence, and the style of basketball that they play. But specifically in the differences between, Eastern Washington, Providence, and Alabama State, because Alabama State played fairly similar to Providence, and so Dad said that they didn't really change the defense too much. Is that in Eastern Washington, they had an interior presence that in Alton Hamilton the fourth, who scored 16, 18 points. If I scroll up here, Alton Hamilton the fourth, he had 18 points and 8 rebounds in 34 minutes. He was a guy who was scoring in the post a decent bit. He had 2 offensive rebounds as well, and that was something that Montana State had in Chris Hodges and Patrick McMahon, and the Buffs specifically weren't doubling in that Montana State game. In that Eastern Washington game, the Buffs were trying to double a little bit more, but the cohesiveness wasn't there because the perimeter players weren't digging into the post, maybe not necessarily doubling but they were supposed to dig down and help to force that ball out to the perimeter. And Eastern Washington shot well from three, 9 of 16 from deep, so maybe that wouldn't have helped if those twos turned into threes. However, if you're supposed to go and dig the ball at the post, there were a handful of times where you could see Evan Batty, Bill Greer, Mike Rohn, Tad Boyle, the whole coaching staff screaming, "Go help on the post." And Bang Dak or Alon McKaylee had guys were getting posted up by Alton Hamilton the fourth specifically, and the perimeter players weren't ducking down into the post to help dig the ball out. Against Alabama State and Providence, the Buffs didn't necessarily need to worry about that presence, so there wasn't as much of that to focus on. But you could see, in general, there was way more cohesiveness because those same issues of not following the game plan in Eastern Washington led to transition buckets of not picking up the ball, not picking up a rim runner, not picking up a shooter who the Buffs knew were a shooter, like what was his name? Johnny Radford? Yeah, Johnny Radford. He was a top NAI shooter last year. Tad Boyle talked about him. There were still moments in this contest where he came down and hit, he went 2 of 2 from 3, where he came down and hit transition threes. And it was just because the Buffs weren't, ready for it. And so against Providence and Alabama State, even though there was the inside presence where, you can talk about, whether the inside defense got better, whether or not you could talk about digging or doubling in the post, you could see the overall cohesiveness was better in transition. And, the Friars still scored. Jalen Sellers still scored in transition and got to the foul line, especially in the second half. Only in the second half. He didn't score in the first. But Jason Edwards, he scored a lot in transition. A lot of the Friars' buckets came in transition as their half-court offense was not good. But that's how they like to play. But for the most part, especially in the first half, the Buffs kept the ball from getting up the floor. And a lot of times, that's why, a lot of the times, the Friars had to rely on shots from the perimeter. Shot so cold from deep to start the game because they wanted to get shots up on the rim. But the Buffs, they were calling out where the ball was. They were calling out rim runners. They were calling out shooters and able to stop pitches up ahead. And you could see in the broadcast, whether it was live or in the replay, on camera cuts, you could see Elijah Malone, Bang Dak, Sebastian Ranchik, Barrington Hargress, guys pointing all across the floor to make sure that everyone is picked up. And so, like I said, yeah, there wasn't the interior presence, but you could see the cohesiveness, spread out as far as the communication, picking up shooters, and as far as following the game plan, the ball screen coverage was far, far better. Tad Boyle said that they changed it, at least from the first 3 games, so they changed it before Alabama State, but against Eastern Washington, even though they had the inside presence more so with Alton Hamilton the fourth, Isaiah Moses, he runs the show. The Buffs knew that Moses was gonna go off, and he did. He went for 30 points. He's a right-handed guy. He made some tough shots, but for the most part, the Buffs, they weren't playing too high on pick and rolls. With Moses coming off, and he's able to get downhill and make some of those tough shots. But in Providence and Eastern Washington, the Buffs were playing much higher. The bigs were showing higher on pick and rolls, which deterred guards from, not only getting downhill, but just they weren't able to. They had to, try and split the defense. I remember Jason Edwards did that once against, split Barrington Hargress and Elijah Malone, I believe it was, but missed a floater because he saw Bang Dak and Sebastian Ranchik creeping in from the blocks. And so, Providence, their pick and rolls were not as, solid. And, even though Jason Edwards and Jalen Sellers and Stephon Vox are all talented players, just as talented as Isaiah Moses, maybe more, they weren't able to get to some of their shots because they weren't able to get downhill and get into the paint, and therefore they weren't able to kick as well. And is part of the reason why, Providence, even though they got some decent looks, only shot 6 of 25 from deep because a lot of the 3-point looks were coming off of catch and shoot passes side to side instead of inside out, like most teams would prefer. So the Buffs, they were playing higher in the ball screen coverage, showing higher. You could see the guards fighting through the screens more, but more specifically against Alabama State, where the Buffs, Tad Boyle talked about changing the screen coverage. He talked about how Alabama State's guards are right-handed, and it was a big emphasis how the Buffs couldn't stop the dominant hand of the best players on Montana State and Eastern Washington. Buffs were able to better follow the scouting report because on pick and rolls, when guys were coming, when Alabama State wanted to come and set screens for Ajon Anderson, for Micah Simpson in the middle of the floor. They'd run this action where they throw it to the left wing and there'd be a handoff and some other stuff like that. And basically get the ball to one of those two at the top, and the big guy would come up from the right block and come and try and set a screen, or come from the left block and try and set a screen. It looks like oftentimes the Hornets wanted to go to the right hand because that's where their guys are more ball dominant. But you could see Felix Casares, you could see Barrington Hargis, Isaiah Johnson, Josiah Sanders, Jalen Holland, etc., whoever the guard was on one of those guys, heavily guarding Anderson and Simpson's right hand and making sure that whatever screen was coming was having to be set on their right hip and forcing whatever ball handler to go to their left hand because CU's ball handlers were just playing so high up on the Hornets, right hands. And so you could see how, that the Buffs wanted to force the action to go to the left side of the floor. And so they weren't showing as high necessarily on those ball screens that were going to the left side. But that's because that's what they wanted. And you could see how it led to turnovers, how it led to tougher shots for Simpson and Anderson. And there's still a few times where they converted. You could see in the second half how the Buffs slightly changed their coverage a little bit, and I think that's why that led to a little bit of the slump that they had for the first 10 to 12 minutes or whatever, where Alabama State was outscoring them. But you could see that the Buffs were trying to force the action to go to the left side, whether starting with the on-ball defender, playing, forcing the guy to go left. But even when the ball did go, to that right side with a pick and roll, you could see the high showing from Malone, Mikaeli, Bengadak, etc. And sometimes you even see a foul from those guys because they maybe haven't necessarily gotten their hips as high and gotten in position to cut off the guard towards half court. That's a hard thing to do, and then having to go back and tag the roller. But the Buffs have done a solid job, and you can see that in the ball screen coverage. You could see it, in the transition defense. Like I've talked about as far as picking up guys, and specifically against Alabama State, it was another solid job of following the scouting report as the Hornets came into this game averaging 14 turnovers a game, I believe it was. The Buffs only forced 11. But the Buffs, they extended their defense for most of that contest, especially in the first half, and that is why the Hornets shot only 35% from the field, is because they had a struggle getting the ball up the floor, getting into action. They turned the ball over quite a bit. They had to call timeouts at a few points because of getting trapped near half court. And the Buffs were just, able to, play to not even necessarily their strengths, because they are athletic and defensively minded, but, also the weaknesses of, the Hornets and Alabama State and, some of the other teams that they've played the past few games. So, the defense just all around has taken steps up. It's not to say it's been fantastic in every single facet. Like I said, specifically in that Providence game, you could see moments where, when Stefan Vox got going, he's a microwave. He can score a bunch of points fast. It's just kind of how he is. But in that first half, when he hit a three and hit a floater, that was because the Buffs weren't high showing, and he was able to get off the ball or come off screens and get into the paint. Or come off and get a handoff and have more space than the Buffs would have liked. And he was able to score. In that second half, when Jalen Sellers could not stop getting fouled, how many free throws did he shoot? He shot 9 free throws. That's Isaiah Johnson. I almost cursed too. My fault. Jalen Sellers, 10 of 11 from the line. He got fouled a bunch of times, and that was because he was, pushing the ball up the floor, and the Buffs weren't as communicative in transition and stopping the ball. So, it's not like the defense was perfect. There were still some lapses, but for the most part, the Buffs, especially, with their interior defense, lack of inside presence that Providence and Alabama State had, and how well the Buffs have been rebounding the ball and turning that into offense, their defense has been far, far better than what we've seen in the first two games. It is because of those adjustments. But yeah, then looking at the offense, there isn't too much to talk about, just because the offense has been productive through all 4 games of the season. At no point really has the offense looked poor for more than 2 or 3 minutes. And those stretches came more so in the first 2 contests, where there were times where the ball maybe hit the right wing, specifically, and the action would maybe happen on the left side of the floor on the opposite side, and maybe there was a post-up trying to happen on the right block. I don't know what was going on. but the Buffs just weren't moving the ball in the first 2 games of the season, and that's part of why they weren't able to shoot as well against Eastern Washington. And the Buffs, I mean, they still shot over 50%, but obviously not as solid as Eastern Washington, and the Buffs had to rely on the offensive rebounding a little bit more in that contest. And that's because Eastern Washington went zone down the stretch of the game, and the Buffs just, they were able to move the ball a little bit, but weren't able to necessarily get inside as much as they would have hoped. That's kind of why the Buffs had to, shoot the 3 ball the most that they have had all season, shooting 23 attempts, which isn't anything huge, but they hit 11 of those, which of course came up big in an overtime game, and while the offense was still solid in that game, shooting over 50%, only 9 turnovers, 16 assists, all these things. The offense the last 2 games, you could see the ball movement a whole lot more against Providence. The Buffs had 18 assists against Alabama State. The Buffs had 20. Had 11 turnovers in both those games, but still haven't had more than that mark. And that's because, Providence, that was more the Buffs. Versus both teams, the Buffs have just been moving the ball more. Versus Alabama State, there was more of an emphasis on working the ball around the perimeter in order to get an inside look, as the Buffs just had far more of an inside presence against Alabama State. So I don't know. You just saw more fluid action, more passing, and things like that to get the ball inside. But against Providence, one thing that I thought was impressive was the fact that Oswin Munwenze, I don't know how you pronounce that exactly. I'm sorry, but he had 7 blocks in that contest. He's a Big East Defensive Player of the Year potential. The Buffs, they got blocked by him quite a few times, but outside of it still didn't deter the Buffs from trying to score the ball inside, as they were able to utilize the pick and roll with Bang got Dak in the first half, even though he didn't play on the stretch, but especially Elijah Malone and Alone McKaylee. Both those guys were solid in the pick and roll as well, but they showed up and helped Barrington Hargress have 8 assists in the second half. They helped convert the 3 assists that he had in the first half as well. So they were big parts of the offense and able to use their body and not only find good positioning and score in the post, but they drew a bunch of fouls, as Oswin Munwenze and excuse me, what's his name? Cole Hargrove, the backup center, also dealt with foul trouble. So those guys, they were running the floor well, able to apply pressure on the rim in transition, especially Alone McKaylee, who assisted some transition buckets. But they were able to, draw fouls, score the ball, and that was huge. Just speaks more to the depth as well. They've, the fast pace, that's been, thanks to Barrington Hargress and Isaiah Johnson. Those guys keep pushing the ball, but you can also look at Josiah Sanders. When he's in the game, he's getting the ball at the floor, just as good as the other two. And that's part of the reason why he's trusted so much to, be probably the 3rd ball handler on the team if Johnson and Hargress aren't in the contest. You can also look at Alone McKaylee, who's moving the ball in transition. You can look at Banggot Dak, who's finished some oops in transition. Jalen Holland, he's been running. All these guys have been looking to score the ball. With that inside presence being as solid as it has, as I mentioned, whether it's been post-ups or the pick and roll or whatever it may be, there is, the emphasis for, the Oswin Munwenzes of the world to get up and block 7 shots in the interior. But that's going to allow for, with the collapsing defense, that's going to allow for kickouts in Hargress to have, 11 assists, because not all of them are going to come in the pick and roll, even though I just said they all did. But they, they're going to come on kickouts. Johnson had a few kickouts. They're going to come on kickbacks on fast breaks. And that's what happened for the Buffs. But yeah, I don't know. I feel bad. That's not the greatest overall. That's not the greatest overall. Rundown of the Buffs offense after rewatching. But yeah, they just move the ball well. I like the pick and roll specifically when Banggot Dak is running it, just because of the alley-oop ability. I feel like the Buffs, because they've been moving the ball, that's kind of the reason why Barrington Hargis has been a lot more efficient. As the scouting reports of other teams have had to account for more Buffs. And I guess one thing that I haven't talked about is in that Providence game. Bangad Dak, he didn't play down the stretch. Sebastian Ranchik, he dealt with foul trouble, as I mentioned earlier. And so those guys weren't able to be as productive, especially after Sebastian Ranchik had 24 points, a career high, versus Eastern Washington, where the Buffs need all 24 of those points. In that game against Providence, they got to rely on Barrington Hargis, Elijah Malone, their bench pieces in Isaiah Johnson and Alone McKaylee, who had 35 points off the pine. Those are huge, legit minutes, where the Buffs are able to find offense when their top options from their returners aren't able to score the ball. And it's because there's so many options, there's so many guys to rely on. The defense needs to worry about a ton, but when the interior is have to worry, the defenses have to worry about the interior so much, that allows for Barrington Harvish to get to that mid range that he's able to get to, that he hit so much at UC Riverside. When him and Jalen Holland and Josiah Sanders and Isaiah Johnson are coming downhill, the big guy still needs to worry about Elijah Malone rolling and taking up space, potentially cleaning up an offensive rebound. They need to worry about Bangad Dak going up for an alley-oop. And so, that gives enough space for those guards that I just named to get to the rim and score the ball. So, you could just see that a lot more, especially as the Buffs are, pushing the ball up the floor and, getting paint touches and doing all the other things I said. I've been yapping for quite a bit. It's been 31 minutes on this pod. Just to briefly talk about UC Davis, they're 4-1 on the year, led by Jim Les, who's a pretty tenured coach. UC Davis, the Aggies, they haven't had a solid year in quite a bit. At least they haven't made March Madness in quite a few years, which was hard to do as a mid-major team. But last year they were 15-17. They have a handful of returners from that team though, led by Niles Cooper. He's leading the team with 18.5 points, but Connor Sevilla, 17 points per game, and two other guys in double digits. But handful of returners for the Aggies, who are coming to the CU Event Center on Friday night at 7 p.m. At 7 p.m. Mountain Time on ESPN Plus. So the Buffs will need to worry about them. They don't play as fast as the Friars, as Alabama State. But they look to shoot the ball quite a bit. They're not as tall, so there is the potential to get the ball up the floor, especially against Colorado. But it'll be interesting because, like Eastern Washington, Montana State, it seemed like they tried to slow down the ball a little bit more on the offense, try and limit the advantage that the Buffs have in the altitude. Where the Friars and the Hornets, Providence, Alabama State, they didn't do that as much. They try to still play fast, and you could kind of see that come back to bite them. Especially in that Providence game. So, it'll be interesting to see how fast, the Aggies play, even though they have an average pace of play. I think they'll end up probably relying on that three ball. They don't have anybody who's 6'10" or taller besides this one junior off the bench, but it doesn't look like he plays much. So, I'd expect the Buffs to be able to control the glass, and still have the interior dominance that they've had through the first few games that has been so prevalent on both sides of the ball, with the points in the paint, the inside-out looks, the rebound advantages, the amount of three-point attempts that opposing teams are having to take, all those things. But I will say the two other things I'd have to note is that UC Davis has turned the ball over a ton, 15.8 turnovers per game, reminding us of a team that we watched quite a bit of. And the other thing is Niles Cooper. He was the only starter who hasn't played all 5 games, and the only game he missed was the Aggies loss to Portland, which was on the road, and it was a close loss. But yeah, he didn't play in that contest as a leading scorer, and it was a close loss to Portland on the road for UC Davis. So he's back in the swing of things. He helped UC Davis beat Nevada this last Tuesday, I think it was. So this team can be dangerous, even though there's some flaws. Specifically with the turnovers, the height, all those things. But the Buffs, they can't overlook them. They've gotten scared by some mid-major teams so far, and I think it should be all these games have been fun for the most part, whether they've been blowouts or close or whatever. A game at the event center has always been fun, especially with this young bunch that the Buffaloes have. I think it'll continue to be. But, I'm looking down at the recording time. It says almost 35 minutes. I've been talking an absolute bunch. I hope you guys were able to take some knowledge, some points out of this, learn some things, even though, I've talked a lot about this stuff in my articles and my TikToks and my other podcasts from the quick reactions, instant reactions, whatever. But yeah, those are some of the things I noticed from the rewatches of the past 3 games, some of my takeaways of individuals and stuff like that, a little preview of UC Davis. So hopefully, that makes sense. I will start introducing the mailbag again. That was something that I wanted to introduce originally with the podcast. It just didn't kind of really make sense when the off season was going on and there weren't as many questions answered. But yeah, I'll get the mailbag in the swing of things. I'll try and get the rewatch podcast up and going as quick as possible. It's just, it's that time of year. It's that time of year, man. Finals are around the corner. The semester's almost up. Senioritis is on my head, bro. It is hounding me. It has the full court press on me. But I need to get to the rim and apply some pressure, upload more content, write more articles, record more podcasts, all the things. So I hope you guys enjoyed that episode of In the Heyday. I'm your host, Oliver Hayes, and the next time I will be talking to you guys will be after the Buffs play UC Davis Friday night at 7 p.m. on ESPN+.